You've been suffering." "It's been tough," he replied. Daisy had never seen his face anything but sun-kissed and healthy, but now it showed signs of pain and endurance. He looked older. Something in his fine, dark hazel eyes hurt her deeply. "You should have told me," Daisy said, disappointed. "Nobody seemed to have any information. The guys said they didn't know. Dad got mad when I asked him. I wouldn't have even bothered asking Dylan, and the truck driver who pulled up lied to me. So I made a point of coming down here today to inquire about you, but I never expected to find you here. Now I'm grateful that I came." The way he looked at her was peculiar, darkly kind and yet strange. "That was just like you, Daisy," he said. "I knew you'd feel terrible about my accident, but how could I have let you know?" "You saved Pronto," she replied, her voice shaking. "I can't thank you enough." "That was a strange thing. Pronto went insane. I hope he's doing okay." "He's practically healed. It took some time to get all the splinters out of him. He'll be fine soon, without any harm caused by that cowboy trick of Mr. Dylan Standish," Daisy finished bitterly. Moore turned his thoughtful gaze away from her. "I hope old Devon is doing well," he said lamely. "Did you tell your parents about your accident?" Daisy asked, disregarding his comment. "No." "Oh, Morton, you should have called them, or at the very least written to them." "Me? To go groveling to them when I got in trouble? I couldn't see it that way." "Morton, you're going to go back to Denver soon, right?" she stammered. "No," he replied curtly. "But what are you going to do? Surely you can't work so soon." "Daisy, I'll never be able to ride like I used to," he said miserably. "I'll ride, yes, but never like before." "Oh," Daisy's tone and the exquisite softness and tenderness with which she placed a hand on the rough crutch would have been enlightening to anyone but these two who were engrossed in themselves. "I can't bear to believe that." "I'm afraid it's true. It was a terrible crash, Daisy. I narrowly avoided becoming club-footed." "You should take care. You should have—" "Morton, you planning on staying with the Andrews?" Daisy asked. "Nah, they got enough troubles of their own. I'm gonna homestead 160 acres, Morton replied. "Homestead where?" Daisy asked, surprised. "Up by Old White Slides. Been meaning to do it for a while. You remember that pretty little valley under the Red Bluff? There's a nice spring. We've been there before, by the old cabin built by prospectors," Morton explained. "I know the place. It's a beautiful valley, but Morton, you can't live there," Daisy objected. "Why not?" Morton asked. "That little cabin is falling apart, roof gone, chinks open, chimney crumbling. You can't live there alone," Daisy said, blushing. "I can take care of myself. I've got friends who'll help me fix it up. And I'll be driving up to haul my stuff from the bunkhouse at White Slides soon," Morton declared. "Morton, are you serious?" Daisy asked incredulously. "Yep, funny how things turn out, isn't it?" Morton said. Daisy was left feeling overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. She said goodbye to Morton and left without another word. All the way home she was consumed with emotions that left her unable to think clearly about the situation. When Daisy arrived at the ranch, she was met by Dylan Standish, who had a face as dark as a storm cloud. He informed her that their father wanted to see her, using an accent that reminded her of his earlier threat. Daisy responded with a haughty tone. "Does he? From the courteous way you speak, I imagine it's important." Dylan didn't bother to reply and instead sat on the porch looking unhappy. When Daisy asked where their father was, Dylan pointed to the second door that led to the room where their father used as an office and storeroom. As Daisy walked past Dylan, he grabbed her skirt and asked, "Daisy, you're angry?" She responded, "I reckon I am," and headed towards their father's office. Dylan implored her not to go in when she was angry, as their father was also angry, and it would only make things worse. Daisy, with her experience, could tell that Dylan had done something that may have consequences. She pulled away from him without saying anything and knocked on their father's office door. He called out, "Come in." Their father was sitting at an old table bent over a soiled ledger with a stubby pencil in his huge hand. When he looked up, Daisy was startled. He gruffly asked, "Where have you been?" Daisy replied, "I've been calling on Mrs. Andrews." Their father asked, "Did you go there to see her?" Daisy responded with a slow break in her speech. "Why, certainly." He then asked, "You didn't go to meet Morton Moore?" Daisy replied, "No." Their father continued to question her. "And I reckon you'll say you hadn't heard he was there?" Daisy replied firmly, "I had not." Their father then asked, "Well, did you see him?" Daisy replied, "Yes, sir, I did, but quite by accident." Their father raised his voice and accused her. "Uh-huh. Daisy, are you lying to me?" Daisy felt like she had been struck a blow as the hot blood flooded her cheeks. She cried out, "Dad!" in hurt amazement. Standish appeared dense, as if he was preoccupied with something and his mind was deeply engaged. His usual calm, confident, bold, and honest demeanor in all situations seemed to have been affected by a break, a confusion, a loss of confidence. "So, are you lying?" he asked again, either not noticing or ignoring her distress. "I couldn't lie to you," she stammered, "even if I wanted to." His heavy, shadowed gaze was fixed on her as if she was a new and perplexing problem. "But you saw Moore?" "Yes, sir," Daisy replied, feeling more confident. "And you talked to him?" "Of course." "Girl, I don't like that, and I don't like the way you look and speak," he said, his voice rising. "I'm sorry, I can't help it," she said. "What did this cowboy say to you?" he asked. "We mostly talked about his injured foot." "And what else?" Standish continued, his voice getting louder. "About what he plans to do now." "Ah, and that's homesteading the Sage Creek Valley?" "Yes, sir." "Did you want him to do that?" "Me? No, not at all," Daisy replied. "Daisy, not long ago you told me this fellow wasn't interested in you. Are you still saying that to me? Are you still insisting he's not in love with you?" Standish asked. "He never said so, and I never believed it. And now I'm sure he isn't," Daisy exclaimed. "Ah, well, that same day you were just as sure that you didn't care anything for him in particular. Are you still sure now?" he asked. "No," Daisy whispered, barely audible. She trembled with the suggestion of unknown forces. She wouldn't avoid any question from this man to whom she owed her life and upbringing, even if she had no claim on him. But something cold formed in her. Standish, self-centered and serious as he strangely was, seemed to stop his probing, either from fear of hearing more from her or from an awakening of former kindness. Her response rocked him to the core. He threw down his pencil, rose from his seat, and loomed over her. "You've been like a daughter to me. I've done all I can for you. I've tried to do right by you. And I love you," he said, his voice deep and emotional. "You know how much I want the best for you and the boy. We don't need to talk anymore. You're free to do as you please. Whatever you decide won't change how much I care for you. But you have to make a decision. Will you marry Dylan or not?" "I promised you I would. I'll keep my word," Daisy replied firmly. "Good," the rancher said. "I respect you for that. So when will you marry him?" The room spun around Daisy and she felt adrift. She had no solid ground to stand on. "Any day you choose, the sooner the better," she whispered. "Well, then I thank you," he replied, his voice distant to her. "And I swear if I didn't think it was the best thing for you and Dylan, I wouldn't let you do it. So let's set a date. October 1st. That's the day you came to me as a baby more than 17 years ago." "October 1st, then, Dad," she said, her voice breaking. She kissed him, acknowledging the debt she owed him, and left the room, closing the door behind her. Dylan saw her and jumped up, his face pale with concern. "Daisy!" he cried. "What happened? You look terrible. Don't tell me you've changed your mind." "Dylan Standish," Daisy interrupted, a look of tragic amazement on her face. "I promised to marry you on October 1st. He shouted with joy and swept her up in his arms. However, the way he handled her showed no signs of boyishness. It was almost savage, evidence of his desire to possess her. "Daisy, I'm crazy about you," he began passionately. "I've never been able to tell you, and it's only gotten worse. Today, when I saw you going down there where that Morton Moore is, I felt insanely jealous. I was sick. I would have been happy to kill him. It made me realize how much I love you. I didn't know before, but now I'm crazy for you." He held her tightly, ignoring her struggles, his face and neck turning red, his eyes burning with desire. He tried to kiss her on the mouth, but she fought back fiercely, and his kisses landed on her cheek, ear, and hair instead. "Let me go," Daisy gasped. "You have no right." "Oh, you could have waited." She broke free and ran to her room, slamming the door almost shut, but his foot blocked it. Standish was half laughing with his triumph, half furious at her escape, and completely beside himself. "No," she said so forcefully that it seemed to remind him that he wasn't the only one involved. "Oh," he let out a deep sigh. "Okay, I won't try to come in. But listen, Daisy, don't mind my way of showing you how I feel. The truth is I lost my mind. Can you blame me, darling, when I was so scared you'd never be mine? Daisy, I felt like you were the one thing in the world I wanted the most and could never have. But now, October 1st. Listen, I promise I won't drink or gamble or nag my dad for money anymore. I don't like how he runs the ranch, but I'll do it as long as he's alive. I'll even try to tolerate that club-footed cowboy's brass in homesteading a ranch right under my nose. I'll do anything you ask of me, said Daisy, her voice trembling with emotion. Then please go away, she cried out, tears streaming down her face. When he finally left, Daisy locked the door and collapsed onto her bed, trying to shut out the light and the overwhelming feelings that had taken hold of her. She wept like a young girl whose innocence was being stripped away. And once the tears had passed, she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She thought about the rancher's plea, her sense of duty, and the decision she had made, but she couldn't shake the disgust and terror she felt at Dylan Standish's reaction to her promise. These were the facts of the day, and they had transformed Daisy into a trembling, unhappy creature. But there was something deeper lurking beneath the surface, something that she couldn't quite put her finger on. I think I understand now, she whispered to herself. If Morton had cared for me, maybe I could have cared for him too. But I do care about something. I couldn't lie to Dad. I'm just not sure how much. I never thought I could love someone like this. It's all so strange. All of a sudden I feel old, and I can't make sense of these feelings that are shaking me to my core. Daisy was left to brood over the trouble that had befallen her. She didn't regret her promise to the old rancher, but she was beginning to realize that her duty and her desires might not always align. She felt alone in her struggles, but a strange reminder of the hunter Kevin flashed through her mind. For a moment she considered confiding in him. Kevin had a gentleness about him, and his face was etched with the trials and tribulations of a life well lived. But Daisy decided against it. She knew that she had to figure things out on her own. But how could she confide in him? He was a stranger, a rugged man from the wilderness whose reputation preceded him. He was infamous and lethal, with the unmistakable essence of the Wild West emanating from him. Nonetheless, Daisy found herself drawn to Kevin. She couldn't stop thinking about him, even as the memory of Dylan Standish's crude touch filled her with growing revulsion and dread. Did she have to endure that? Had she agreed to it? It was then that Daisy began to face the harsh truths of her situation. Chapter 7. The howling of coyotes stirred Daisy from her slumber at the break of dawn. She despised the morning that followed. For the first time in her life, she detested the rising of the sun. She pushed her past aside and focused on the future, convinced that now that she had made a significant decision, she only needed to keep her mind off what could have been and carry out her duties. During breakfast, she found the rancher in higher spirits than he had been in weeks. He informed her that Dylan had ridden off early to Kremling to make arrangements for their wedding on October 1st. "Dylan's gone crazy," said Standish. "Well, that only happens once in a man's life. I remember, Dylan's going to drive you to Kremlin and then take the stagecoach to Denver. You better start packing and fixing up your clothes. Women always want to look sharp on their honeymoon." "Dad!" exclaimed Daisy, taken aback. "I never thought about clothes, and I don't want to leave white slides." "But dear, you're getting married," protested Standish. "Didn't Dylan think to take me to Kremling? You can't make new dresses out of old ones." "Well, I guess neither of us thought about that. But you can purchase whatever you want in Denver," said Standish. Daisy surrendered. In the grand scheme of things, what did it matter to her? The uncertain dreams of her youth would never come to fruition. Daisy was in a state of despair when she realized she had nothing suitable to wear for either her upcoming wedding or trip to Denver. Following the rancher's advice, she decided to refurbish her wardrobe. Daisy spent the entire day sewing, trying to distract herself from her worries and find some peace. She even began to hope that her dedication and loyalty would bring her happiness, despite some nagging doubts in the back of her mind. To her surprise, the prospective groom did not return from Kremling on the second day. Standish was concerned, but Daisy secretly welcomed the delay as she felt unprepared for the approaching October 1st deadline. On the third day, Daisy went for a ride on a different Mustang, wanting some exercise and solitude. She avoided the usual trail and cabins, not wanting to see any of her friends since the awkward visit to the Andrews Ranch. As she rode around the house, she came across Morton Moore in a light wagon. Her Mustang reared up, startling her, but she managed to control him. Morton greeted her with a friendly, "Howdy, Daisy. You've sure learned to handle a horse since I last saw you on this ranch. Who's been your teacher? I couldn't even get you to ride a bronco." The cowboy drawled out his admiring speech, half amused and half sarcastic. "I'm mad," declared Daisy. "That's why." "What are you mad at?" queried Morton. She didn't reply, but kept gazing steadily at him. Moore still looked pale and drawn, but he had improved since the last time she saw him. "Aren't you going to speak to me?" he continued. "How are you, Wills?" she asked. "Pretty good for a club-footed has-been cowpuncher," he replied. "I wish you wouldn't call yourself such names," rejoined Daisy peevishly. "You're not a clubfoot. I hate that word." "Me too. Well, joking aside, I'm better. My foot is fine. Now, if I don't hurt it again, I'll never be a clubfoot." "You must be careful," she said earnestly. "Sure, but it's hard for me to be idle. Think of me lying still all day with nothing to do but read. That's what knocked me out. I wouldn't have minded the pain if I could have gotten about. Daisy, I've moved in." "What? Moved in?" she asked blankly. "Sure, I'm in my cabin on the hill. It's great. Tom Andrews and Bert and your hunter Kevin fixed up the cabin for me. That Kevin is a good fellow, and say, what he can do with his hands. He's been kind to me, took an interest in me, and between you and me he sort of cheered me up." "Cheered you up? Wills, were you unhappy?" she asked directly. "Well, rather. What do you expect from a cowboy who crippled himself and lost his girl?" Daisy felt the smart of tingling blood in her face and looked from Morton to the wagon. It contained saddles, blankets, and other cowboy accoutrements for which he had evidently come. "That's a double misfortune," she replied evenly. "It's too bad both came at once." If I were a cowboy and had feelings for a girl, I would have made it known to her, thought Morton. "This girl knew all right," he said, nodding his head. "She didn't? She didn't," cried Daisy. "How do you know?" he asked, pretending to be surprised. He wanted to torment her. "You mean me? I'm the girl you lost." "Yes, you are, God help me," replied Morton with genuine emotion. "But you never told me, you never told me," stammered Daisy, distressed. "Never told you what? That you were my girl?" No, but that you cared." "Daisy Standish, I told you, let you see in every way under the sun," he snapped at her. "Let me see what?" asked Daisy, feeling as if the world were about to end. "That I loved you." "Oh, Morton," whispered Daisy wildly. "Yes, loved you. Could you have been so innocent, so blind you never knew? I can't believe it." "But I never dreamed you— She trailed off, overwhelmed by a tragic, glorious truth. "Daisy, would it have made any difference?" "Oh, all the difference in the world," she wailed. "What difference?" he asked passionately. Daisy looked at Morton, wide-eyed and helpless. She didn't know how to tell him what all the difference in the world really was. Suddenly Morton turned away from her to listen. Then she heard the rapid beating of hooves on the road. "That's Buster Dillon," said Morton. "Just my luck. There wasn't anyone here when I arrived. Reckon I shouldn't have stayed. Daisy, you look pretty much upset." "What do I care how I look?" she exclaimed, with a sharp resentment attending this abrupt and painful break in her agitation. Next moment, Dillon Standish galloped a foam-lashed horse into the courtyard and hauled up short with a recklessness he was known for. He swung down hard and violently cast the reins from him. "Aha! I gambled on just this," he declared harshly. Daisy's heart sank as she noticed his eyes fixed on her face, which was showing signs of agitation. "What are you crying about?" he demanded. "I'm not," she retorted. His bold, glaring eyes showed that he was angry and had been drinking. His heated red face grew darker with a sneering contempt as he turned to face her. "Where's Dad?" he asked. "I don't know, he's not here," replied Daisy as she dismounted. Dillon's sudden change in expression made her feel uneasy. Morton Moore, who had grown paler, gathered up his reins, ready to leave. "I came up for my things I'd left in the bunk," he said calmly. "I happened to meet Daisy and stopped to chat for a minute." "That's what you say," sneered Dillon. "You were making love to Daisy. I saw that in her face. You know it, she knows it, and I know it. You're a liar." "I reckon I am," replied Moore, turning white. "I did tell Daisy what I thought she knew what I ought to have told long ago." "Well, I don't want to hear it. "But I'm going to search that wagon," said Dillon. "What?" exclaimed Moore, dropping his reins. "You just hold on till I see what you've got in there," continued Dillon as he reached over into the wagon and pulled out a saddle. "This stuff's mine, every strap of it. Take your hands off." Dillon leaned on the wagon and looked up with insolent, dark intent. "Moore, I wouldn't trust you. I think you'd steal anything you got your hands on." Daisy uttered a passionate little cry of shame and protest. "Dillon, how dare you? You shut up, go in the house," he ordered. "You insult me," she replied, feeling humiliated. "Will you go in?" he shouted. "No way," Moore replied coldly. "You know I can't do that, Standish. And here's a piece of advice for you. You better keep quiet and let me drive on, whether it's for her or for your own sake." Standish grabbed the reins and yanked them out of Moore's hands. "You're a damn clubfoot," he yelled as he climbed up on the wheel, but it was clear that he was only pretending to search the wagon. He was really focused on the cowboy, waiting for any excuse to start a fight. Moore seemed to sense this and shook his head at Daisy as if to tell her there was nothing they could do. "Daisy, could you hand me the reins?" Moore asked. "I'm not able to walk very well, you know. I should be on my way." Daisy stepped forward to hand him the reins, but Standish pushed her back with a forceful hand. "Stay out of this or I'll teach you a lesson," he growled. "You're going too far," Daisy protested. Meanwhile, Morton had climbed down from the wagon and was using his crutch to hobble towards the reins that Standish had thrown on the ground. Standish pushed Daisy back even further and then turned to confront Moore. "I've got you now," he said, his voice low and menacing. He was clearly angry and losing control. "You lying snake, I see right through you. You want to pit her against me, try to win her over a week before her wedding day. But I'm not about to beat you up just for that. I hate you. My father always held you up as an example to me, and he even sent me away because of you. That's why I hate you." Standish's anger was raw and unfiltered, bringing out the worst in him. He was usually a calculating man, but now he was consumed by fury. Moore, the cowboy, responded with biting sarcasm. "You're so brave standing up to a one-legged man. If only you had 2 club feet, I'd be even happier." Standish responded by slapping Moore hard, nearly knocking him over. Daisy, watching in horror, felt weak and terrified. Moore warned Standish that he was lucky he didn't have a gun, and called him a coward for hitting him when he was defenseless. Standish swung again, but this time Moore lifted his crutch threateningly. "If you hit me again, I'll knock what little brains you have out of your head. You're just a mean, ugly drunk who's taking advantage of my disability to try to beat me up." Moore then addressed Daisy directly. "You're going to marry this guy? You're going to give yourself to someone like him? You can do better than that." "You worthless piece of garbage," Moore spat, his eyes blazing with fury. "I could take you down with one leg tied behind my back, but if you lay a hand on me again, I'll make sure you regret it." Standish's face contorted with rage. "You're the one who's no good, Moore," he snarled. "You're selfish, bull-headed, and mean, and you always will be." Moore raised his crutch menacingly, but his unsteady footing gave Standish the advantage he needed. The younger man darted around him and tackled him to the ground. Daisy watched in horror as the 2 men grappled and thrashed about, their fists flying and their bodies rolling over each other. For a moment it seemed like an even match, but gradually Standish gained the upper hand. He pinned Moore to the ground and began kicking him with all his might, aiming for the cowboy's injured foot. Moore cried out in pain, but he was helpless to defend himself. Finally, he went limp under Standish's relentless assault. Daisy felt sick to her stomach as she watched the scene unfold. She had never seen such brutality before, and it terrified her. She knew she should intervene, but she was frozen with fear. All she could do was watch helplessly as the 2 men fought to the death. Daisy watched in horror as Dillon Standish mercilessly beat Morton. She wanted to intervene to stop him, to hurt him, but her body was frozen with fear. She couldn't even look away from the brutal scene before her. Just as she thought it couldn't get any worse, she heard the approaching sound of voices and footsteps. With a burst of energy, she screamed for help. Old Devin Standish and the hunter Kevin came to Morton's rescue just in time. Dillon stood panting and disheveled, his face twisted with rage. Morton lay unconscious, his face bloody and his foot heavily bandaged. Old Devin was shocked at his son's behavior and demanded to know why he had attacked a crippled boy. Dillon remained silent, his face still contorted with malice. He seemed to take pleasure in the violence he had inflicted. Eventually he stalked away, leaving Morton to be cared for by Kevin and Daisy. Despite the gruesome scene before her, Kevin's kind words and gentle presence calmed Daisy. She rushed to get water and a towel to help tend to Morton's injuries. Daisy noticed a red stain on the cowboy's face where she had touched him. She couldn't resist the urge to press her lips against it, feeling a strange, thrilling sensation. Just then, Kevin asked her to fetch some things while he tended to the injured cowboy. The rancher remarked that the cowboy looked badly hurt, and Kevin agreed. While Daisy cradled the cowboy's head in her lap, Kevin cleaned his battered and bruised face. The blood kept welling up in some places, despite Kevin's efforts to wash it away. Daisy watched the injured man's face, feeling an overwhelming surge of emotions that she couldn't explain. When he finally opened his eyes, weakly at first and then wider, she was seized by a powerful tremor that shook her entire body. He smiled faintly at Daisy and Kevin before turning his gaze to Standish. "I guess he beat me," he said weakly. "He kept kicking my sore foot until I passed out, but he sure beat me." The rancher spoke up, sounding broken and defeated. "Maybe he did beat you, Wills," he said. "But there ain't much to be proud of in beating a crippled man like that." The injured cowboy, whose name was revealed to be Dillon, weakly defended himself. "Boss, I reckon Dillon had been drinking," he said, "and he had a good reason to be angry. He caught me sweet-talking Daisy, and then I insulted him every way I could think of." The old man seemed at a loss for words and walked away, his shoulders sagging. With Kevin's help, the cowboy was slowly lifted into a wagon, but he could barely sit up. Kevin offered to drive him home and take care of him, while Daisy tried to compose herself. "It could have been worse," Kevin told her. "You'll be okay." "Go to your room until you figure things out," Moore's girlfriend said, looking at him with concern. He gave her a weak smile and said, "I'm sorry." She asked, "What for? Me?" He replied, I'm sorry I was so unlucky to run into you and cause you so much distress. It was my fault. If I had only kept my mouth shut." "Don't be sorry that you met me," she replied, gazing into his eyes. "I'm glad. But oh, if your foot is badly hurt, I'll never—" Morton cut her off and said, "Don't say it." Kevin, in his gentle voice, said, "Lass, you're determined to do something." She echoed, "Determined? Yes, I'm determined like your name to speak my mind." She ran towards the house and up onto the porch, her chest heaving and her eyes flashing. The rancher was scolding his son, and when he saw her he was shocked. Dillon Standish, the son, cowered. "Dillon Standish," she cried, "you're not even half a man. You're a coward and a brute." In one tense moment she stood there, her gaze full of lightning scorn and passion, and then she rushed out just as impetuously as she had come. Chapter 8. Daisy didn't leave her room for the rest of the day. She didn't want anyone to know what she was going through. She had a vague idea of the cost of conquering herself again. Nevertheless, she was able to conquer herself, and that night she made up for the sleep she had lost the night before. Strangely, she didn't feel afraid to face the rancher and his son. Recent events had not only changed her, but had also given her strength. When she showed up at the breakfast table, Dillon was nowhere to be found. The old rancher greeted her with more concern than usual. "Dillon's sick," he said after a while. "Is that so?" replied Daisy. "Yes. He said it was the drinking he's not used to. Well, I guess it was what you called him. He didn't care much for what I called him, which was a wimp." "Let me tell you, girl, Dillon has set his heart so hard on you that it's terrible," said the old man. "What a strange way he has of showing the affections of his heart," replied Daisy shortly. "That was the drink," remonstrated the old man, pathetically and earnestly attempting to smooth over the quarrel. "But he promised me he wouldn't drink any more." Standish shook his gray old head sadly. "Yes, Dillon fires up and promises anything. He means it at the time. But the next craving that comes over him wipes out the promise. I know. But he's had a good excuse for this break. The boys in town began celebrating for October 1st. It's a wonder Dillon didn't come home completely drunk." "Dad, you're as good as gold," said Daisy, softening. How could she feel hard toward him? "Daisy, then you're not going back on the old man?" "No. I was afraid you'd change your mind about marrying Dillon. When I promised, I meant it. I didn't make it on conditions. But girl, promises can be broken, he said with the sonorous roll in his voice. I've never broken one of mine. Well, I have. Not often, maybe, but I have. And girl, it's reasonable. There are times when a man just can't live up to what he swore by. And for a girl, well, I can see how she could change and grow overnight. It's only fair for me to say that no matter what you think you owe me, you couldn't be blamed now for disliking Dylan. Dad, if by marrying Dylan I can help him to be a better son to you and more of a man, I'll be glad, she replied. Girl, I'm beginning to see how big and fine you are, replied Standish with strong feeling. And it's worrying me. My neighbors have always accused me of seeing only my son, only Buster Dylan. I was blind and deaf to him. Well, I'll be darned if I'm not seeing things more clearly these days, the old man exclaimed. The scales are falling off my eyes. But I still have one hope for Dylan. That's marrying him to you, and I'm sticking to it. I'll stick to it too, Dad, she replied. I'll go through with it until October 1st. Daisy abruptly stopped talking and left the breakfast table to attend to her work. She managed to complete her tasks despite frequently getting distracted and gazing out the window at the dull slopes of the nearby mountain. Later, when she went out for a ride, she spotted Lem, a cowboy, working in the blacksmith shop. "Hey there, Miss Daisy. Are you still hanging around this ranch?" he asked her with a smile. "Lem, I'm almost embarrassed to face my good friends. I've been neglecting them for so long," she replied. "Aw, now, what are friends for but to hang out with? You're looking pale, I reckon. More like that flower I see so much on the hills." "Lem, I want to ride Pronto. Do you think he's okay now?" Daisy inquired. "I reckon some movement will do Pronto good. He's been eating his head off," Lem replied. Lem accompanied Daisy to the pasture gate and whistled for Pronto. The Mustang came trotting over, looking none the worse for wear and eager to climb the hills with his owner. Lem saddled him carefully, ensuring that the cinch wasn't too tight. "Be careful and remember your saddle's loose," Lem warned. "Okay, Lem," Daisy replied as she mounted. "Where are the boys this morning?" "Blood and Jim are repairing the fence up the creek," Lem informed her. "And where's Ben?" Daisy asked. "Ben? Oh, you mean Kevin. Well, I haven't seen him since yesterday. He was skinning a lion over on the ridge in the morning." "I reckon he's around 'cause I seen some of them hounds," said Lem, scanning the horizon. Daisy chimed in. "Then, Lem, you haven't heard about the fight yesterday between Dylan and Morton Moore?" Lem perked up. "Nope, I ain't heard a word." "Well, they fought all right," Daisy continued hastily. "I saw it. I was the only one there. Morton was badly beaten before Dad and Ben got there. Ben drove off with him." "But, Miss Daisy, how'd it happen? I saw Wills the other day. He was up at his homestead and could barely move around on a crutch. He couldn't fight," Lem questioned. "That's exactly it. Dylan saw his chance and forced Morton to fight, accusing him of stealing. Wills tried to avoid trouble, but Dylan attacked him. Morton held his own until Dylan started kicking his injured foot. Then Morton passed out and Dylan continued to beat him," Daisy explained. Lem hung his head, trying to hide his expression. "Well, doggone me, that's too bad." Daisy rode away from Lem and towards Kevin's cabin. She didn't know why, but she had an urge to tell the truth about the fight. She wanted to shout it from the rooftops. As she rode, the hounds announced her arrival with their booming barks. Samson and Jim lay on the porch, exhausted from a lion chase the day before. The other hounds were chained nearby in the aspen grove. Samson wagged his tail but didn't get up. If Kevin had been home, he would have come out to see what was going on. Daisy noticed another lion pelt hanging on the wall of the cabin as she passed by. She followed the brook, feeling relieved to have unburdened herself by telling someone about the fight. The rain had ceased, and now the sun shone down upon the rough and swift waters, making them sparkle and shine. The eddies were a deep green and crystal clear. Daisy rode past the dam that was made by the beaver that lived in the valley. She noticed that the beaver had freshly cut willows, indicating that it was preparing for the upcoming winter. Daisy remembered how Kevin had been fascinated by the old beaver and had spoken about trapping some younger beavers to keep it company. She followed the trail that led across the brook, where Pronto's splashing made the trout scatter. Daisy knew that this trail led up to Sage Valley, where Morton Moore had settled. She saw fresh horse tracks and knew that Kevin had passed that way earlier. As she rode, the hound Cain appeared and followed her, flushing out sage hens along the way. Daisy called to him, and he came, wagging his tail somewhat awkwardly. She continued on her trot, and Kane followed her. The mountain known as Old White Slides had lost its vibrant colors and was now a dull blend of yellows and greens. Sage Valley was one of the many valleys at its base, half a mile wide. It was bordered on one side by an aspen-thicketed slope, and a brook babbled along its edge. Daisy was surprised to see so many cattle grazing there, wondering to whom they belonged. Standish's stock had already been driven lower for the winter. As Daisy approached the group of horses, she spotted the white Mustang that Standish had given to Moore. She felt a thrill at the sight of him, but also a pang of sadness at the thought that his owner might never ride him again. Daisy suppressed her emotions as she continued towards the cabin, which was situated on a terrace behind a cluster of aspens and sheltered by a picturesque gray cliff covered in vines and shrubs. It was the perfect spot for Moore's homesteading adventure. The cabin looked different than the last time Daisy had seen it. It no longer appeared dilapidated or unused, but there was nothing new about it either. As she dismounted and tied her horse Pronto, Daisy's heart was beating fast with anticipation. The door was open, and Kane, one of the dogs, ran inside. She could hear Kevin scolding him in his familiar voice, followed by Morton's lower voice saying that he thought he heard a horse. Kevin appeared in the doorway and recognized Daisy, allowing her to enter. Daisy greeted them all cheerfully, but there was an underlying emotion in her voice. Morton was lying at the far end of the room under the light of a window, and the inside of the cabin felt unfamiliar to her. She replied that she had indeed come to see him and asked how he was doing. Morton replied that he was tickled to death at the sight of her. "I don't want you to see my beat-up face," Wilsmore said. Daisy replied unsteadily, "Don't worry about it." At first she couldn't see him clearly because she was misty-eyed and had a lump in her throat. To regain her composure, she looked around the cabin. "Well, Wilsmore, this is amazing!" she exclaimed in amazement and delight. Daisy was completely taken aback. The interior of the prospector's cabin had been transformed by a magical hand. A carpenter, mason, and decorator had all worked wonders. Daisy looked from one end of the cabin to the other, taking in everything from the large window where Morton lay on a blanket to the open fireplace where Kevin grinned. She looked up to the clean roof made of aspen poles and down to the floor, which was carpeted with deer hides. The gaps between the logs of the walls had been filled with red clay, and the dust and dirt were gone. The cabin smelled like sage, wood smoke, and fragrant frying meat. There was a glowing bed of embers, a steaming kettle, and a smoking pot. The smoke and steam curled up the chimney, indicating its excellent draught. In each corner of the cabin hung a deer head, from which hung cowboy accoutrements like spurs, ropes, belts, scarfs, and guns. One corner had a tall cupboard with new, clean wooden doors, and next to it was a brand-new table. On the blank wall beyond that there were pegs holding saddles, bridles, blankets, and clothes. "He did all of this inside," Moore exclaimed, thrilled by her joy. "Hell-bent Kevin is what they call him. Daisy, isn't this fantastic? I don't mind being laid up." Daisy couldn't help but exclaim, "I call him Heaven-sent Kevin," when she turned to the hunter who had just helped her. He dropped his forked stick when she thanked him, and she noticed his hand shaking when he picked it up. It was a strange sight to her. "You might just be an angel sent from heaven, Ben," she said jokingly, but with a hint of seriousness in her voice. "Me, an angel? That would be a new job for Bent Kevin," he replied with a strange laugh. "But I would do my best to live up to it." As Daisy looked around the room, she noticed small sprigs of golden aspen leaves and crimson oak leaves on the wall above Morton's bed. A rifle hung on pegs beneath them, and a glass jar containing freshly picked columbines was on the window-sill. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and Daisy felt a surge of emotion within her that she couldn't explain. Moore explained that Kevin had brought the flowers in because they were his favorites as well as Morton's. He wanted to enjoy them while he could before the frost killed them. Daisy's gaze then fell on Morton's bandaged hand, and she touched it gently. "Why is your hand all wrapped up?" she asked. The cowboy laughed humorlessly. "Have you seen Dillon this morning?" "No," she replied. "Well, if you had, you'd know what happened to my fist," he said with a hint of bitterness. "Did you hurt it on him?" Daisy asked, shuddering slightly. "Daisy, I busted that fist on his handsome face," Morton replied with a sense of satisfaction. "He meant to kill you," Daisy murmured, horrified. "Sure, and I would have cheerfully killed him," Morton replied with a hint of anger. "You two must never meet again," Daisy said firmly, knowing that the situation could easily escalate and lead to something much worse. "I hope to God we never cross paths again," Moore replied with a serious tone that conveyed more than his words. "Morton, can you stay away from him for me?" Daisy pleaded, unconsciously holding onto his bandaged hand. "I will. I'll take the back roads. I'll move like a coyote. I'll hide and keep an eye out. But Daisy Standish, if he ever corners me again—" "Then you'll leave him to hell-bent Kevin," the hunter interrupted, looking up from where he knelt and fixing his inscrutable eyes on the cowboy. Daisy saw something beyond his face, deeper than the darkness, a passion and spirit that drew her like a magnet. "Now, Miss Daisy," he continued, "I reckon you'll want to take care of our invalid. He needs to eat." "I certainly will," Daisy happily agreed as she sat on the edge of the bed. "Ben, get that box and put his meal on it." As Kevin did as he was told, Daisy, shyly aware of her proximity to the cowboy, tried to keep the conversation going. "Can't you use your left hand?" she asked. "That one's worse," he replied, revealing it from under the blanket where it had been hidden. "Oh!" Daisy exclaimed in dismay. "I broke 2 bones in this one," Morton said excitedly. "Say, Daisy, our friend Kevin is a doctor, too. He's the best I've ever seen. And a cook, too, because here's your meal. You have to sit up," Daisy ordered. "Fold that blanket and help me get you up on it," Moore replied. It was strange and unsettling for Daisy to bend over him, to slip her arms under him and lift him up. It reminded her of her forgotten days of playing with dolls. Her face flushed with heat. "Can you move?" she asked, suddenly realizing how heavy the cowboy was. "Not much," he replied. Drops of sweat appeared on his bruised forehead. It must have been painful for him to move. "You said your foot was okay." "It is," he confirmed. "The darn thing is still on my leg," Moore grumbled. Daisy looked at him skeptically before starting to feed him. "Is it worth getting licked for this treat?" he asked. "Nonsense," she replied. "I'd stand it again to have you here, but not from him." Moore's attempt at humor fell flat. "Daisy, you've changed. You're older. You're a woman now, and the prettiest—" "Are you going to eat?" Daisy interrupted, trying to steer the conversation back to the matter at hand. Moore eagerly agreed, but Daisy found it difficult to feed him. Between his helplessness, his constant staring, and her own growing feelings, she struggled to remain composed. And all the while, heaven-sent Kevin watched silently in the background. Moore eventually declared that he couldn't eat any more, and Daisy changed the subject. "Are you planning to winter here?" she asked. Moore confirmed that he was, and that he had a small herd of cattle in the valley. Daisy congratulated him on his success, but wondered who would take care of him and his stock while he couldn't work. "My friend there, heaven-sent Kevin," Moore replied, gesturing towards the quiet man at the table. Daisy offered to bring him anything he needed and left the room feeling conflicted. She couldn't help but wonder if Kevin could read her mind and if he understood her better than she understood herself. "Get lost," he murmured softly. The young man raised his eyebrows. "But how am I supposed to get anything for you if I'm not there?" he asked. "Of course, that's right. Then bring me some jam and a book tomorrow. Can you do that?" "I definitely can." "That's a promise. I already know your promises from before." "Then goodbye until tomorrow. I have to go. I hope you feel better." "I'll stay sick in bed until you stop coming." Daisy left quickly, and when she stepped outside, she noticed that the hills had never looked so gray or dreamy, their solitude so sweet, or the sky so rich and deep blue. As she untied Pronto, the hunter came out with Kane following him. "Miss Daisy, if you take it easy, I'll catch my horse and ride down with you," he said. She mounted and guided Pronto out onto the trail, slowly making her way down the gradual incline. She hadn't realized how high up she was until then. The view was stunning, the rolling foothills, colored so beautifully at that hour, and the black-rimmed ranges, one on top of the other, and the distant peaks glowing in the sunset across the purple sky, all opened up and clear to her sight, so wildly and splendidly expressive of the Colorado she loved. At the bottom of the hill, Kevin joined her. "Lass, I'm asking you not to tell Standish that I'm taking care of Wills," he said in his gentle, persuasive way. "I won't. But why not tell Dad? He wouldn't care. He'd do the same thing himself." "Maybe he would. But this situation is different. And Wills isn't in as good shape as he thinks he is. I'm not taking any chances. I don't want to lose my job, and I don't want to be prevented from taking care of this boy." They had arrived at the first aspen grove when Kevin made this statement. Daisy stopped her horse, causing him to do the same. The young woman's former misgivings were amplified by the sadness and lines on Kevin's face. "Ben, please tell me," Daisy whispered, placing a hand on his arm. "Miss Daisy, I'm a bit of a doctor in my own way. I studied medicine and surgery, and I know what I'm talking about. I wouldn't be telling you this if I didn't need your help," Ben replied. "I'm here for you, just tell me," Daisy interjected, trying to steady herself. "Wils's foot is in bad shape. Buster Dillon kicked it and messed it up pretty badly. It's worse now than it was before. I'm afraid of blood poisoning and gangrene. You know gangrene is when the flesh dies and rots. I told Wills that I might need to cut his foot off, but he swore he'd rather die than lose his foot. If gangrene sets in, we might not be able to save his leg, and maybe not even his life," Ben explained. "It can't be that bad," Daisy protested. "I knew there was something wrong. Ben, does this mean he'll never ride again?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Even in the best-case scenario, Wills will never ride like a cowboy again," Ben confirmed. "That's the worst news," Daisy cried. "He loved to ride. He was the best rider of them all. And now he'll be ruined. He'll be lame, a cripple, club-footed, all because of that brute, that coward Dillon Standish. I hate him, oh, I hate him, and I have to marry him on October 1st. God help me," Daisy wailed. Overcome with emotion, Daisy fell out of her saddle and onto the grass, where she cried uncontrollably. Her tears fell onto the dry grass, and her words were incoherent in the midst of her terrible grief. Kevin dismounted from his horse and knelt beside the woman, placing a gentle hand on her heaving shoulder. He didn't say anything, but waited until the storm had begun to subside before raising her head. "Lass, nothing is ever as bad as it seems," he said softly. "Come, sit up. Let me talk to you." "Oh, Ben, something terrible has happened," she cried. "It's in me. I don't know what it is, but it'll kill me." "I know," he replied as her head fell on his shoulder. "Miss Daisy, I'm an old fellow that's had everything happen to him, and I'm still trying to help people along. No one dies so easily. You're a fine, strong girl, and something tells me you were made for happiness. I know how things turn out. Listen." "But Ben, you don't know about me," she sobbed. "I've told you I hate Dillon Standish. But I've got to marry him. His father raised me from a baby. He brought me up. I owe him my life. I've no relatives, no mother, no father. No one loves me for myself." "Nobody loves you," echoed Kevin with an exquisite tone of repudiation. "Strange how people fool themselves. Lass, you're hugging your troubles too hard. And you're wrong. Why, everybody loves you. Lemon Jim, why, you just brighten the hard world they live in. And that poor hot-headed Dillon, he loves you as well as he can love anything. And the old man, no daughter could be loved more. And I love you, lass, just like if you might have been my own. I'm going to be the friend, the brother you need. And I reckon I can come somewhere near being a mother if you'll let me." Some subtle power or charm stole over Daisy, assuaging her terrible sense of loss, of grief. There was tenderness in this man's hands, in his voice, and through them throbbed strong and passionate life and spirit. "Do you really love me?" Daisy whispered, feeling comforted by Kevin's presence. She realized that he offered her the love and care that she had missed as a child. "And you want to be there for me?" "Yes, lass, and you'd better give me a try," Kevin replied. Daisy felt grateful for Kevin's kindness. "I knew it from the first time I met you. I've been wanting to tell you my troubles. I love my dad, and he loves me too, but he doesn't understand me. He's too focused on his son. I've never had anyone to talk to. I've always been alone." "You have me now," Kevin said, his voice smooth and calming. "And because I've been through a lot, I can tell you what might help you. Women are stronger and braver than men. Life has been hard on you, with no real parents and being responsible for a man who loves his son blindly. But you have to face it with what women have more of than men. Courage. Even if you hate Buster Dillon and love Morton more, don't deny it. You have to be honest and square with yourself. If you feel it's your duty to pay your debt to the old man you call Dad by marrying his son, then be a woman. There's nothing greater than a woman can be, and there's happiness that comes in strange, unheard-of ways. You didn't put yourself in this situation. So if you face it with courage and faithfulness to yourself, it won't turn out as bad as you fear." If you ever feel like your heart is shattered, I want to share my story with you. It's one of heartbreak and a life in ruins, but I kept going. I found happiness in unexpected places, whether it was through fighting or working. I discovered the beauty of the world around me, the flowers, hills, and wild creatures, and I fell in love with them. It was enough to live for. I can't wait to show you all of this, to share the wonder and joy with you. That will be the ultimate reward. And if it means that much to me, then you can be sure that I'll do anything for you." Daisy wiped away her tears and looked up at him, a newfound sense of hope in her eyes. "Morton was right," she whispered. "You're a heaven-sent angel, and I know I'm going to love you." Chapter 9. Daisy was consumed by a newfound spirit, a liberation of her own, that burned within her unquenchably and unutterably. Some divine spark had penetrated the depths of her soul, inflaming and illuminating her. When she emerged from the hour of calamity, she felt that the tenderness, sorrow, and fidelity in her soul had been joined by the lightning flash of passion. "Oh, Ben, will I be able to hold on to this?" she cried, throwing her arms open as if to embrace the winds of heaven. "This what, lass?" he asked. This woman," she answered, her passion evident as she swept her hands back to press against her breast. "No woman who wakes ever goes back to being a girl," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I wanted to die, and now I want to live to fight. Ben, you've lifted me up. I was little, weak, miserable, but in my dreams or in some state I can't remember or understand, I've waited for your very words. I was ready." As if they had known each other in a past life, Daisy felt a connection with Kevin that she couldn't explain. His words spoke to her heart, calling out to her womanhood in a way that only a mother could. It was strange and beautiful, and Daisy couldn't help but feel drawn to him. "Miss Daisy," Kevin replied, adjusting his saddle, "you're young and don't understand the strange and terrible things in life. But beautiful, yes, as you say. Who knows? Maybe in a former state we were something to each other. I believe in that, even if I can't say how or what. Maybe we were flowers or birds. I have a weakness for that idea." "Birds. I like that thought too," Daisy responded. "I love most birds, but there are hawks, crows, buzzards. Balance, lass. There has to be balance in nature. Without the ugly and evil, we wouldn't appreciate the beautiful and good. Now let's head home. It's getting late." Daisy hesitated, wondering if she should go back to Morton and tell him something important. But Kevin convinced her that tomorrow would be better, and they rode back to town in silence. "Good night, lass," Kevin said as they reached his cabin. "And remember, you're not alone anymore." "Good night, my friend," Daisy replied before riding on. When she arrived at the corrals, she saw Jim Montana tending to Pronto. Although he seemed surly, Daisy guessed that he had ridden to Kremling and back on Dillon's orders. "Miss Daisy, I'll tend to Pronto," Jim offered. "Your supper is waiting," Daisy announced as she entered the living room. A warm fire crackled in the hearth, casting a cozy glow. The rancher was engrossed in a book, but looked up at the sound of his daughter's voice. "Well, hello there, rosy cheeks," he greeted her with unusual amiability. "Been out riding again? If you ain't pretty, then my eyes are poor." "It's cold, Dad," Daisy replied, rubbing her arms. "And the wind stings, but I didn't ride fast or far. I went to see Morton Moore." "Uh-huh. Well, how's the boy?" asked Standish gruffly. "He said he was all right, but I don't think that's true," Daisy responded. "Are there any friends looking after him?" "Oh, yes, he must have friends. The Andrewses and others. I'm glad to say his cabin is comfortable. He'll be looked after." "Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'll send Lem or Kevin up there and see if we can do anything for the boy." "Dad, that's just like you," Daisy said, smiling and patting his shoulder. "Uh-huh. Say, Daisy, here's letters from almost everybody in Kremlin wanting to be invited up for October 1st. How about asking them?" "The more the merrier," replied Daisy. "Well, I reckon I'll not ask anybody," Standish said, his mood shifting. "No one can gamble on that son of mine, even on his wedding day." "Dad, what did Dillon do today?" Daisy asked, changing the subject. "I'm not saying he did anything," Standish replied. "Dad, you can gamble on me," Daisy said determinedly. "Well, I should smile," he said, putting his arm around her. "I wish you were Dillon and Dillon was you." At that moment, the young man in question slouched into the room, his head bandaged from a recent injury. He took a seat at the supper table. "Well, Daisy, let's go and get it," Standish said cheerily. I can always eat anyhow." "I'm hungry as a bear," Daisy said as she sat down opposite Dillon. "Where have you been?" he asked, curious. "Why, good evening, Dillon. Did you finally notice me? I've been riding Pronto the first time since he was hurt." As they rode through Sage Valley, Daisy couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over her. Dillon, on the other hand, was less than thrilled. Glaring at Daisy with his one unbandaged eye, he grunted something under his breath and began stabbing at his dinner with his fork. "What's wrong, Dillon? You don't look too well," Daisy asked with a sweetness that was almost too much to bear. "I'm fine," Dillon snapped back, clearly irritated. Daisy couldn't help but notice that he did in fact look sickly. His mouth drooped at the corners, and his skin was pale with red splotches. His one eye seemed to glow with an otherworldly sadness. "You sure you're not getting married with only one eye?" she teased, and Dillon couldn't help but laugh. His father, who had been watching the exchange with amusement, joined in. "Haw, haw, haw, by golly, lass, I'd never believed that was in you," he said, slapping his knee. But as soon as they were alone, Daisy's mood shifted. She couldn't help but think about the spiritual growth she had experienced since meeting Bent Kevin. His wisdom and nobility had left a lasting impression on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for something greater than just personal happiness. Daisy was determined to hold on to the spirit that had awakened in her, deciphering from Kevin's unrefined philosophy the enlightenment she needed for her own fortitude. She acknowledged her responsibility to the man who had raised her as a father figure. Whatever he requested of her, she would do. As for the son she was bound to for life, she knew she had to be a good wife, accept his flaws, and always try to aid him with kindness, patience, loyalty, and the affection she could provide. She recognized the existence of hate, but believed it had no place in a virtuous woman's heart. She would strive to expel it if possible. It would be difficult, but she was resolute, knowing her own mind. Her soul was unalterable, no matter the hardships she faced. She could always be alone with her soul, detached from people's trivial worries and troubles. Kevin's words had electrified her with their mystery and the boundless promise of an unknown world of thoughts and emotions. She might never experience happiness in the ordinary sense. Alas, her dreams might never come true. But she had glimpsed something higher than pleasure and contentment. Dreams were just that, dreams. But she could still dream of the beauty and enigma of life, of something in nature that beckoned her sweetly and irresistibly. Who could take away the rolling, gray, velvety hills, the purple peaks, and the black ranges that surrounded her when she was discovered as a waif, a little lost creature born like a columbine under the spruces? Love, sudden and inexplicable, was her secret, still quivering and new and dangerous in its sweetness. That was the only thing she was afraid to confront and accept, because it was an unknown variable, a menacing flame. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks, her spirit surging with a newfound strength. "I gotta tell him," she whispered. "He deserves to know, even if it means saying goodbye forever." The thought of telling Morton filled her with a sweet anticipation, but the prospect of leaving him behind left a bitter taste in her mouth. She couldn't predict what would come of it, but the uncertainty only fueled her resolve. The hours crept by, the silence of the house and the mournful howls of coyotes outside only serving as a reminder of her lost childhood. The next day, Daisy chose a horse that could carry her swiftly and rode towards Kevin's cabin. But as she reached the grove where he had first revealed his gentle heart, she hesitated. She climbed the slope slowly, taking many breaks to catch her breath. When she saw Kevin's horse tied up outside, her anxiety eased a bit. He would be inside, and she wouldn't have to confess her secret right away. With newfound courage, she stepped towards the open door and called out, "Daisy, you're late!" Morton's voice greeted her, filled with both joy and reproach. He lay on his bed, alone in the room. "Where's Ben?" she asked. "He was here earlier, but he left with the hounds. But it's all good now," Morton assured her. As Daisy approached his bedside, she felt as if her heart was being pulled in different directions. But as she looked down at Morton, she knew what she had to do. He looked better, and she owed it to him to be honest. The redness and swelling on his face had subsided, and there was no trace of pain in his eyes. They were dark and expressive, and if Daisy hadn't come to unburden herself, it would have been hard for her to resist his gaze. Had she been blind all this while? "You look better," she said, relieved, "but I had a bad night. I couldn't sleep until dawn. Kevin found me asleep. Daisy, it's good of you to come. You look wonderful. I've never seen your face glow like that. And your eyes? Oh. Do you think I'm pretty? Daisy asked dreamily, not really paying attention. He let out a contemptuous laugh. Come closer, he said, extending his bandaged hand. Daisy fell on her knees and covered her face with both hands. She shook violently and let out a muffled sound. Why, Daisy? Moore cried out in surprise. Good heavens, don't cry. I didn't mean anything. I just wanted to feel your hand. Here, she said, blindly extending her hand and groping for his. Her other hand was still covering her eyes. Daisy wanted to revel in this moment of unutterable joy and sadness that could only come to a woman once. What in the world? The cowboy exclaimed, bewildered. He took her trembling hand. Daisy, you're acting strange. You're not crying. Am I locoed or what? Look at me, dear. Daisy removed her hand from her eyes and surrendered. Morton, I'm ashamed, sad, and gloriously happy, she said, breathless. Why? He asked. Because of something I have to tell you, she whispered. She leaned over him. Can't you guess? He turned pale, and his eyes burned with intense fire. I won't guess. I dare not guess. It's something that's been true for years forever. It seems something I never dreamed of till last night, she went on softly. Daisy, he cried, don't torture me. Do you remember long ago when we quarreled so dreadfully because you kissed me? She asked. Do you think I could kiss you and live to forget? I love you, she whispered shyly, feeling the hot blood burn her. That whisper transformed Morton Moore. His arm flashed round her neck and pulled her face down to his, and, holding her in a close embrace, he kissed her lips and cheeks and wet eyes, and then again her lips, passionately and tenderly. Then he pressed her head down upon his breast. My God, I can't believe, say it again, he cried hoarsely. Daisy buried her flaming face in the blanket covering him, and her hands clutched it tightly. The wildness of his joy, the strange strength and power of his kisses utterly changed her. Upon his breast she lay without desire to lift her face. All seemed different, wilder, as she responded to his appeal. Yes, I love you. Oh, I love you. Dearest, lift your face. It's true now, I know, it's proved. But let me look at you. Daisy lifted herself as best she could, but she was blinded by tears and choked with utterance that would not come, and in the grip of a shuddering emotion that was realization of loss in a moment when she learned the supreme and imperious sweetness of love. Kiss me, Daisy, he demanded. Through blurred eyes she saw his face, white and rapt, and she bent to it, meeting his lips with her first kiss, which was her last. Again, Daisy, again, he begged. Daisy whispered no more as she held on to Moore's neck with her arms, burying her face and stifling her sobs. Moore held her silently, knowing something was terribly wrong but not daring to voice his fear. Daisy wanted to prolong the moment but knew that if he kissed her again her duty to Standish would vanish. She released her hold on him, wiped her tears, and stood up, trying to gather the strength to face him. Kevin's loud voice called the hounds from the cliffs, startling Daisy. She told Moore that she was to marry Standish on October 1st. Moore's face changed and whitened as he gasped, No! Daisy confirmed it was true, causing Moore to exclaim hoarsely. He accused her of saying she loved him, but she confirmed that was true too. Kevin entered the cabin, hesitated, then came to Daisy's side. Daisy reached out to him as Morton fought for self-control in vain. Why are you marrying Dylan Standish if you love me, Daisy? Kevin demanded. I have to, Daisy replied. Why? Kevin asked. I owe my life and upbringing to his father. His father wants me to marry Dylan and help him become a man. My dad loves me and I love him. I have to stand by him and repay him. It's my duty, Daisy explained. You have a duty to yourself as a woman, Kevin retorted passionately. Standish is blind to the shame of such a marriage, but you're not. You can't love two men. You'll give yourself to him. You'll be his wife. Do you understand what that means? I think I do, Daisy replied faintly. You'll bear his children when you love me. Didn't you think of that? Kevin cried. Oh, no, I never did, Daisy wailed. Then think before it's too late, Kevin implored. Dearest Daisy, think. You won't ruin yourself. You won't? Say you won't. But oh, Kevin, what can I say? I have to marry him, Daisy said. I'll kill him before he gets you, Kevin threatened. You mustn't talk like that. If you fought again, if anything terrible happened, it'd kill me, Daisy said. "You'd be better off," Kevin retorted, white as a sheet. Daisy leaned against Kevin for support, her spirit holding but her strength weakening. She knew what was inevitable, but Morton's agony was rending her. "It's your life, your happiness, your soul. Standish is crazy over that spoiled boy. He thinks the sun rises and sets in him. But Dylan Standish is no good on this earth. Daisy, dearest, don't think that's my jealousy. I am horribly jealous, but I know him," Kevin pleaded. "He's not worth you," Morton exclaimed, shaking his head. "No man is, and he's the least of them all. He'll break your heart, drag you down, ruin your health, and kill you as sure as you're standing there. I could prove to you what he is, but I won't. Trust me, Daisy, believe me." "Morton, I do believe you," Daisy replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "But it doesn't make any difference. It only makes my duty harder." "He'll treat you like he treats a horse or a dog. He'll beat you," Morton warned. "He never will. If he ever lays a hand on me—" Daisy trailed off, her voice firm. "If not that, he'll tire of you. Dylan Standish never stuck to anything in his life and never will. It's not in him. He wants what he can't have. If he gets it, then right off he doesn't want it. Oh, I've known him since he was a kid. Daisy, you've got a mistaken sense of duty. No girl needs to sacrifice everything just because some man found her as a lost baby and gave her a home. A woman owes more to herself than to anyone." "Oh, that's true, Morton. I've thought it all. But you're being unjust and harsh. You make no allowance for some possible good in everyone. Dad swears I can reform Dylan. Maybe I can. I'll pray for it." "Reform Dylan Standish? How can you save a bad egg, that damned coward? Didn't he prove to you what he was when he jumped on me and kicked my broken foot until I fainted? What do you want?" Morton seethed. "Don't say any more, please," Daisy cried, wiping her tears. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have come. Ben, take me home." "But Daisy, I love you," Morton pleaded desperately. "And he may love you, but Daisy, he's been—" Here Moore seemed to struggle with himself, holding back words that threatened to spill forth. Daisy only heard his declaration of love, and her heart stirred in response. "You're talking like this is all one-sided," she burst out as the surge of hot blood washed over her once more. "You don't love me any less than I love you, maybe even less because I'm a woman. I love you with all my heart and soul." Moore fell back on the bed, spent and overwhelmed. "Kevin, my friend, please do something," he whispered, turning to the hunter as a last hope. "Tell Daisy what it means to marry Standish. If that doesn't change her mind, then tell her what it means to me. I'll never go back home. I'll never leave here. If she hadn't told me she loved me before, I might have been able to handle it. But now I can't. It'll be the end of me, Kevin." "Boy, you're talking nonsense again," replied Kevin. "This morning when I came in, you were dreaming and talking crazy. Now listen up, both of you. You're both right.